Hey everyone, it's Selwen here, starting with the Warlock. First, covering Affliction. Affliction is that pure dot damage over time spec that is particularly powerful, especially now in battle for Azeroth on sustained single target damage, such as bosses. Because of its dot nature, there's quite a ramp up time for you to perform well. Short-lived fights are by far your strong suit, such as trash, but if you are allowed to do what you need to, you'll be a force to be reckoned with. And even though you are a dot spec, your burst can be extremely powerful thanks to abilities like Deathbolt and other CDs, but again, you do need that ramping up and setup. Outside of damaging abilities, utility is not short on the lock, but mobility is indeed quite poor to say the least. But before going through all of that, let's talk talents. So on the tier 1 we get that Deathbolt. Deathbolt currently takes a big-ish part of your rotation, a short cooldown ability that damages the target, dealing 30% of the total remaining damage on your dots. So yeah, this can be so powerful when you set up your dots and abilities correctly. Plus will change your thought process from just keeping up dots to be always preparing for that next Deathbolt, but we'll go over that later. As for the others, are not that great, but Drained Soul is okay for open world or leveling, or of course dungeons, especially during Explosive Week on Mythic Plus, because it replaces your Shadow Bolt, which is your filler, to basically have this channel ability that deals damage over time. You can stop and channel as many times as you wish, so makes movement slightly easier, but its biggest benefits is 1. Does double the damage at 20% of HP and generates 1 soul shard when the target dies. So you can fish or snipe for a lot of soul shards, so your resource during trash. We'll talk more about that in a minute, but yeah, when you think about it like that, it can be really good for Mythic Plus. That said, damage-wise, Deathbolt still beats everything, even in dungeons, but keep in mind Drained Soul has some niche use. As for Nightfall, sadly not that great. Corruption has a 25% chance to grant a proc to make Shadow Bolt instant cast, which is fun. I love this talent because it's a classic, but what it does besides improving mobility isn't all that great. Second tier we have Siphon Life, yet another dot to keep up, the go-to for pure single target fights, like most raid bosses, perfect to feed bigger Deathbolts. However, if you don't want the hassle of yet another dots and don't mind losing a bit of DPS, Wraith in Agony will be okay for just a stronger Agony with 0 change in your rotation. Absolute Corruption in turn is the go-to anytime you have 2 or 3 targets more, so dungeons clearly, although you can still take Siphon Life here if you can deal with it, or for Tyrannical Week you don't really need it, but great still for Cleave/AoE fights. Why? Because it makes your dot management so much easier by making Corruption permanent, so it frees you 2 or more global cooldowns depending on how many targets are active in the fight. Wraith in Agony has some potential as well in Cleave fights or even Mythic Plus, making your Agony gain 5 more stacks. It's gonna take longer to reach its maximum potential, however there's a trait called Sudden Onset that makes it start at 4 stacks. So once you acquire this, Wraith in Agony can compete, if not better, on prolonged fights against Absolute Corruption. Next is entirely optional. Burning Rush tends to be the go-to for that sprint of sorts, 50% movement speed increase at the cost of HP. Great, but take in mind the health drain. Don't be that guy that forgets that it's up. I know it's a little bit clunky, but hey. Dark Pact is equally good, just this big shield to absorb damage, so allows you to take more damage instead of moving, like a proper Warlock should, and Demon Skin for something entirely passive. More self-heal basically, and a bigger shield from your Soul Leech passive, which is this small shield you get based on the damage done by you and your pet. Next tier we get AoE choices. Here the go-to is Phantom Singularity, another cooldown-ish ability on a 45-second cooldown. It deals a lot of damage in AoE and heals you slightly, but in single target you can also feed Deathbolt and can still deal a lot of damage. As for the others, Sow the Seeds is good alternative for Mythic Plus/dungeons for a more reliable ability to use if you prefer. Just take in mind, Seed of Corruption isn't that powerful currently. As for Vile Taint, I just don't really recommend due to its soul shard cost. Damage is fine, but the cast time and soul shard makes it quite unappealing to take in dungeons, even though it does have a slow combo, which is pretty decent utility, but its damage and resource cost doesn't really make it all that worth to take. And on the next one is again optional. Dark Fury is reducing your now baseline stun Shadow Fury, great for more uses for dungeons, Mythic Plus, and etc. Demonic Circle will then be the go-to for anything else, will really improve your mobility by gaining this teleport, so place it wisely, make good use out of it. I cannot stress that enough. Try to learn or know the fights, so if you know an ability is coming to where you're gonna go, place it ahead of time. I guess a good example, and a simple example, is something like Mother or Zekphos I-Beam, be that Wind Push from Mother or that sort of mechanic that you need to move away quick, like I-Beam. Place the teleport in a safe area and then make proper use out of it without having to run away, because again, you don't move all that fast. As for Mortal Coil, is basically a self-heal, but the fear can serve as an extra CC in Mythic Plus. Be mindful of the mob pulling other packs, and it can interrupt obviously because it's a fear. Tier 6 we got Haunt as the go-to for basically everything, another ability to maintain to increase the dot damage on that same target, plus it can reset if the target dies with it active, so pretty decent for dungeons as well. However, Shadow Embrace is a good alternative. Is it better DPS wise? No, but it's much easier to use for your Shadow Bolt or Drained Soul especially, to apply this damage increase on the target passively. As for the Grimoire of Sacrifice, gets rid of your pet entirely, or rather you sacrifice your pet. Again, not as strong DPS wise, but remember that you sacrificing your pet, you gain its abilities, which means you can sacrifice your Fell Hunter for a self-interrupt for Mythic Plus if you think that having him is a hassle. You do lose the Dispel from him though. And on the last tier we get Dark Soul Misery. Infuses your soul with the misery of the fallen foes, very edgy, but also the most powerful choice. 2-minute cooldown for 30% haste, perfect to combo with your other CD, Dark Lair, and just make your dots even more powerful. As for dungeons, Creeping Death is great as it makes your dots tick faster overall, so for short-lived fights, which is pretty much most of a dungeon or Mythic Plus or even open world, is indeed great. However, this doesn't make our AoE or multi-targeting into a beast. We are still single target monsters after all, and we will shine on Mythic Plus bosses, not on trash. So consider taking Dark Soul Misery anyway, especially if it's Tyrannical weak. Again, the same thought process with Siphon Life and Absolute Corruption. This can depend on the dungeons, obviously, where bosses can or not be tougher. In general, Affliction talents right now, like the Deathbolt choice, Haunt choice, are really cookie cutter and very focused around single target. But hey, now before we get to the actual rotation and priorities, let's talk about pets. Pets take a big part in your Warlock. In Affliction isn't as crucial component as say Demo, but is still meaningful because not only they bring a lot of utility, because yes, you can give health stones, summons, teleports, but only your pets can interrupt, dispel, CC, and more, which are abilities highly valuable in Mythic Plus. So what pet should you use and when? Well, first of all, your pet's damage is actually been homogenized, meaning is all the same except for the Voidwalker, which is more tanky pet, but the Imp, Fell Hunter, and Succubus all do about the same damage, just bring different buffs. To put it simply, for raids and for most encounters, you want to be running with the Imp. He's ranged, meaning target switching or adds or any boss movements won't become an issue, plus he grants you Blood Pack, increasing your health, so you're gonna be able to take a few more hits. Then he also provides Singe Magic as part of your command demon ability, allowing you to dispel a magic effect. Yes, a dispel almost equal to a healer dispel that you can use on yourself or anyone else. And guys, I know losing DPS to try and dispel some guy because the healer failed or whatever, it sucks, but remember that it exists and can be so valuable on certain raid fights with debuffs or of course dungeons. Then you have the Fell Hunter. This is for the most part your dungeon pet because it can interrupt, and interrupts in Mythic Plus are crazy valuable, and as a lock you do lack one. Not only that, you also has a secondary ability that dispels called Devour Magic. Yes, a purge, so keep buying that in your action bars, like now. You can do it automatically, but it's best to do it manually so it doesn't actually purge something that it doesn't matter. That being said, if you need such abilities for raid bosses, make sure to take it instead of the imp. As for the succubus, is the least valuable outside of PvP scenarios because what she brings is a slow and a charm like CC, so can be useful in dungeons as well, but not as much. Now, none of your pets actually AoE, however, your Voidwalker does with consuming shadows, so even though he's a tank, it can be quite good to AoE DPS in dungeons, if you don't need the Fell Hunter interrupt, that is. Just turn off his taunt and aggro passive and you're good to go. With all of that said, let's talk about abilities. Let's go over the main idea with Affliction first, then discuss the death bolts since part of your thought process while playing the spec is about it, and then your openers and cities, which again take a huge part in your gameplay. But before we get there, the absolute basics. Most of your rotation, so your basic rotation that you're gonna do most of the time, is basically just dot management. Your main priority dots are Agony and Corruption. Corruption is the most simple, does damage and you have to maintain it. Agony though has this ramp up time, starting at 1 stack, and every tick it increases damage up to 10 stacks, or starts at 4 if you have that trait. Additionally, it has a chance to grant you a soul shard. Soul shards are your main resource. Long are gone the days of mana and life tap, but soul shards is what you're gonna need to use your most powerful dot, Unstable Affliction, or Suit of Corruption, which is part of your AoE to spread corruptions, but more on that in a bit. Outside of those Agony procs, only way to get soul shards is if you take Drain Soul and use it to snipe when targets die. So its management with Unstable Afflictions will be a key point to learn Affliction gameplay. But before that, we also have Siphon Life to apply, another dot to maintain essentially, not much else to it as well. After we have Haunt, is a castable ability that deals instant damage but increases all of your damage done to the target by 10%. So much like your dots, use it on cooldown to maintain it. Then we get to Unstable Afflictions. Like I said, is your highest damaging ability by far. It costs 1 soul shard, is a short-lived dot that instead of refreshing with multiple applications, they stack for even more damage. So they have separate dots up to 5 equal to your soul shard cap. On top, when it's active and much like Haunt, it increases all of your damage done to the target by 10%. And still, its soul shard cost is refunded if the target dies with it active, something to take in mind later on. So the idea with it right now in this example of a normal basic gameplay is quite simple. You want one active pretty much all the time, not only to get its damage, but because of the damage increase that those 10%. Outside of CDs and death bolts, which we're gonna talk about after, only one is needed. If you get to 4 or 5 soul shards, which is gonna be really rare besides the setup for your CDs, once again more on that in a bit, you can and should use the second one to avoid overcapping soul shards, okay? Never let that happen, but pretty much outside of those abilities, keep only one active for the damage increase, refreshing or reapplying the second one with 1 or 2 seconds away from dropping, so you keep those benefits rolling, especially if you also have another trait that when you apply Unstable Affliction on top of another Unstable Affliction, you gain haste, so make sure to always use it before it actually drops, so you get that haste. Speaking of which, refreshing dots, is there a perfect time to do so outside of that trait and Unstable Afflictions? Well, yes, because dots have this hidden passive or mechanic called the Pandemic Effect. The Pandemic Effect basically allows you to refresh your dots at 30% of their duration for optimal uptime, so they will get this perfect extra time on them, which does have a limit, so the Pandemic Effect sets that sweet spot. So for Agony, this starts at 5.4 seconds, Corruption 4.2, and Siphon Life 4.5, meaning when you get to those timers is when you should think about refreshing those same dots. For an example, Agony lasts for 18 seconds, but when refreshing during this Pandemic Effect window, it will become 21.5 seconds. Getting the idea? Getting a weak aura like this will highlight it without you having to physically track the seconds of each separate dot, making your life so much easier. Check down below in the description on how to get them. After that, just keep that up and fill in with Shadow Bolts pretty much. They don't do anything, it's just damage, so it's the filler in every sense of the word. Just keep a lookout to refresh your dots and refresh haunts and etc. when spamming those said Shadow Bolts. Take in mind the global cooldowns. And yeah, this pretty much covers the basic basic rotation. But what about Deathbolt? Well, Deathbolt can be a little bit confusing. What it does is that it's gonna take a chunk, 30%, of all of your dots active in order to deal damage. So on the surface, you might think, I want as many dots active for every Deathbolt, with as many unstable afflictions as I can. And yes, but also no, because you shouldn't overthink Deathbolt. In fact, it's about using it almost on cooldown and as a fire and forget ability. So for an example, during one of those basic rotations that I just talked about over, if you had a Deathbolt ready, you use it. As simple as that. No need to think about it overly much, as long as all of your dots are up and at least one unstable afflictions, which is a rule that we already set, you're good. If you have the leeway to apply 2 unstable afflictions, so if you have, let's say, 3 soul shards, yes, you can do that for a Deathbolt, but don't go out of your way to apply multiple unstable afflictions and go empty or refresh your dots purposely to boost it. No, get it and use it. It's far more important to maximize its uses than actually setting up these perfect dot timers. Prepare for it ahead of time, yes, but don't drastically change your rotation because of it. That's pretty much the rule that you want to follow. Another ability that can boost Deathbolt is Phantom Singularity, which is another dot to use on cooldown, and when you can stack it with a Deathbolt. That said, Phantom Singularity is an AoE ability, so if there's ads in a fight or some other target, feel free to delay it a little bit to hit them. Now, this thinking on Deathbolts and even your unstable afflictions and even Phantom Singularity will change when we get to cooldowns, so the Dark Lair and Dark Soul Misery. So let's go over your opener and then when to use them mid-fight. Dark Lair is a pretty interesting cooldown. It's a pet that you summon that deals damage according to how many dots you have active on any targets, and it will extend all of your dots duration by 8 seconds. So when starting up, you want to set up for those MCDs. So you want to precast a Haunt, just as the pool timer is about to go down, and this will clear you a global cooldown later on, even though Haunt is not a priority number 1 ability. After that, you apply your dots, same order as previously, Agony, Corruption, and Siphon Life, and then the Phantom Singularity. As for Dark Soul, you want to pop it after you set up those dots, and will allow for faster unstable affliction applications. So after you use that Dark Soul and you pop things like trinkets or racials, you want to dump all of your unstable afflictions or, well, soul shards. The idea here is to apply 5 unstable afflictions, okay, before you pop your Dark Lair, so dumping all of your soul shards. This way you're going to maximize Dark Lair's damage and properly make use of that dot extension effect. If you cannot reach the 5, that's fine, just dump all of them as you can. Once empty, you pop the Dark Lair and immediately go for a Deathbolt for a pretty huge hit. Remember that those extensions and that setup is also boosting Deathbolt greatly. But yeah, after that, just keep it up. Your unstable afflictions are gonna last for a pretty long time, but from here on out, just keep with the basic rotation, fill in with Shadow Bolts, only using 1 unstable affliction to keep up the damage increase, and use your Deathbolts on cooldown and Phantom Singularity as previously mentioned, and you're good for the next few minutes, or rather the next 3 minutes or so. So using those same cooldowns mid-fight do require some preparation and setup. Not all fights will allow this, but fights that are at least 3 minutes or more will, so you will use them at least 2 times. Perfect time will be right at the end as a boss is about to die, but doesn't always work out that way. Dark Soul Misery always goes hand in hand with Dark Lair, so don't use it solo, okay? Save it for then. Stack them up always, and like your opener, to properly make use of your Dark Lair and those CDs and even Deathbolt, you want to stockpile soul shards for unstable afflictions. So when 45 seconds or so away from Dark Lair to being ready, you're gonna stop unstable afflictions altogether. Again, stockpiling soul shards. That said, you don't want to overcap, so if you add 4 or 5, do use 1 to prevent that, hence why I mentioned that earlier in the basic rotation bit. Besides that, make sure as well to have Deathbolt ready. Remember, you just have 30-second CD, so you have a big leeway, and of course, Phantom Singularity as well. Then, as Dark Lair is about to come off, so 5 seconds or so, you want to do the same as your opener. Try to have your dots refreshed within the pandemic effect, then pop your Phantom Singularity, Dark Soul, dump all of your soul shards on unstable afflictions, aiming for the 5 if possible, most likely you do have 5 now, and then Dark Lair and the Deathbolt, and then just keep her up like before. And yeah, that basically covers it. A couple of notes before we move on to AoE though, which is 1. There is a trait that makes corruption improve drain life damage. So if you do have it, make sure to drain life at 90 stacks or more, okay? Not much else to it. If the bosses are about to die and your CDs are way too far off, just dump your shards, okay? Don't be saving them, you want to end the fight with 0 shards, remember that. Another thing to remember is that you do get refunded if the targets die with it active, so if there's ads, feel free to use them if you can time it right, and again of course in dungeons. So yeah, as for AoE, not a lot of changes, everything stays the same, you just want to multi-dot. Only difference is if there's 3 targets or more, instead of applying corruptions separately, just go for a Seed of Corruption to save you global cooldowns. After that, there's no point in spamming Seed of Corruptions, the damage is not high enough unless there's like 10 targets or more, something crazy like that. Or if you have Soda Seeds, target count does lower, so if you have like 4 or 5 targets, do spam those Seed of Corruptions. But besides that, what you're gonna do is just apply multiple Unstable Afflictions, multi-dot them essentially, just like you do with your Agony and stuff like that. As for Haunt, do keep it on a priority target that you wish to take down fast. So yeah, everything exactly like your single target, but here you just multi-dot. Remember the refunds again, so you can be more lenient on Unstable Afflictions uses. And yeah, that covers it. As for stats and traits to then wrap up. So stats, Mastery is usually the winner here on everything. Only then is Intellect for dungeons. Haste values a little bit higher since getting faster dots and shorter global cooldowns really helps you there for the multi-dotting, but still Mastery is king. In terms of traits, I did mention a couple that change slightly your gameplay, but you can see on screen what's currently best, but check down below in the description a website to track all of your traits as they change, and new ones might be added in the future, so in the patch 8.1, but yeah, that covers it all. As always, thank you for watching, hope it helps, remember to like and subscribe to get more videos like this, and check out my Patreon if you wish to support the channel. Have a fantastic day everyone, and I'll see you all next time. See ya.